right, so let's get started with today's class. Thank you for joining, Amy. Hopefully, we get some more students that come in. But we'll start with our lesson plan anyways. As normal, we're gonna begin with our vocab, couple new words, couple of you know, sorry, not a couple, but just one paragraph that we're gonna write about, a creative writing assignment. We'll move on to our novel study after this. We'll check out a novel that's pretty much tied in perfectly with our lesson plan. So this novel is going to talk a lot about like memory, um, kind of how does people's perspectives and opinions and memory and experiences affect one another. And our lesson plan after that's going to be about themes. This theme, obviously, memory, trauma, and the past. So let's check this out. We got our first slide here. Amy, can you read this slide for me, please?
Abject. Definition: having a smooth, rich flow, filled with something, such as honey, that sweetens. Example: somehow he had to mask his abject terror with a look of calm courage. Last, lassitude. Definition: a feeling of lack of interest or energy. You're weary and just can't be bothered. Example: Oscar stood by the sink holding his phone. That drained lassitude spreading over him again.
All right. Excellent job, Amy. And I actually made a an error here. The word abject is incorrect. Um, Let me give you guys the actual word. Sorry, the actual definition. All right. So the sentence, the example is perfectly fine. The definition I provided was incorrect, but now this one's correct. A state of being extremely bad, severe, wretched, hopeless. Um, we get the point here. It's when you are feeling very much down, everything is just crumbling, you're hopeless. That is abject. Almost kind of like you're humiliated, you're embarrassed, you can't show your face. And in this sentence here, somehow he had to mask his abject terror. So it's an adjective describing a noun, abject terror, a very severely bad state of terror. That's what they're describing here. Lassitude, it's a noun. It's also a feeling of a lack of interest, very nonchalant, very much can't be bothered. That's what this word means. So yeah, let's use these two words, both feelings, and let's write about this topic. Write a scene where the past physically interrupts the present. And the rest of this paragraph is kind of just giving you some pointers on how to write this. It would help you to use non-linear structure to shift between timelines mid-sentence or mid-paragraph and show how the character struggles to stay grounded. So the key part here is I want to, excuse me, I want to see if we can write a paragraph where we are going back and forth in time. So we start in the present day, we move back in time. Whatever happens back then alters our present day. So that's what I want to see in our answers. Um, I'll provide this prompt over here. All the info is on this page. Make sure you're using both vocab words. If you have any questions for me, please let me know. Let's try to get this done in roughly 10 minutes. All right, so it's been a little over 15 minutes. Let's try to get our answers submitted as soon as possible. Like whatever you have written so far, you can just hit submit and let's take it up ASAP. All right, nice. I got one answer submitted. Try to get these answers submitted a little sooner next time. But Amy, can you read your answer, please?
The heavy snow hit the ground. Abject coldness was affecting Rowan. The lassitude he felt was increasing every day. He took from his bedside table the battered and old time turner. He felt a sensation of being pulled back. Next moment, he stood next to a big and beautiful house. He remembered the day when his grandfather had disappeared. Everybody thought he was the one who killed him. However, he knew it was not him. He saw a tall figure in a black cloak moving across the snowy plains, a flash of green light, then nothing. He collapsed on the ground, despair filling him as he knew who was the true criminal.
All right, nice. So we got abject and lassitude used very early in our paragraph here, and we're making use of a lot of short sentences. So this is pretty good if we're trying to build suspense. You know, things just happen very quickly. We're not explaining too much, so it's good. So the heavy snow hit the ground. Abject coldness was affecting Rowan. Abject meaning something that's severely bad. Usually used like to explain something that's humiliating. We have hopeless, that's another word. So yeah, it works here. It's not bad. The lassitude he felt was increasing every day. Lassitude meaning just an overall feeling of lacking interest, nonchalance, lacking energy. He took from his bedside table the battered and old time turner. He felt the sensation of being pulled back. Next moment, um, next moment. I think we're missing a little bit of extra words here. Um, in that next moment. He stood next to a big and beautiful house. He remembered the day when his grandfather had disappeared. Everybody thought he was the one who killed him. However, he knew it was not him. He saw a tall figure in a black cloak, moving toward the snowy plains, a flash of green and white, then nothing. He collapsed on the ground, despair filling him. Despair? Filling him as he knew who was the true criminal. And, you know, if you want to say criminal, that's fine. But I think killer would work a bit better because we're talking about someone that got murdered. So let's use this word instead. But yeah, overall, good stuff. We have the idea of traveling between different time periods established here, so that's good. Um, yeah, nicely done. And we're going back and forth, so we're not just talking about something that happened back in time. We're talking about how the character went back to the present time after. Anyways, that is the only answer that I got submitted, so I will be moving on. to our novel. Eric, can you read this page for us, please?
Summary. The Sympathizer is narrated by an unnamed protagonist, a half French, half Vietnamese man serving as a communist spy embedded within the South Vietnamese army. After the fall of Saigon, he flees to the United States with the general and other refugees, where he continues his espionage activities while navigating life in exile. The novel unfolds as a written confession addressed to a communist commandant, revealing both his political loyalties and his internal conflicts. As the narrator becomes increasingly entangled in both American and Vietnamese communities, he is forced to confront the contradictions within his identity and beliefs. His dual role as both observer and participant exposes the moral ambiguities of the war, ideology, and loyalty. The narrator moves toward the psychological and ideological reckoning, where the narrator must face the consequences of his actions and the complexity of his divided self.
All right. Excellent job. So here, when I first prefaced this novel, I described how it deals with memory. It describes how it is um, kind of talking about different perspectives, how one character is conflicted. And that's exactly what most of the second paragraph is detailing. So we have a character um, that's kind of on the fence of two very polarizing situations. In this case, it's a very political or politically driven story. And because of that, there's very drastic, very firm perspectives at both ends. Our character's in the middle of it. He has to decide what are the contradictions he's facing, what are his beliefs, where does he stand, um, where is his identity in all of this? And yeah, he's acting as both the observer and the participant. He is observing both sides, but he's participating or he's choosing when to participate. Um, yeah, so we'll check this out. We'll see what a lot of these perspectives and what memory has to do with this, what trauma has to do with this, conflicts that he's um, dealing with internally. We'll try our best though, because we do have a very brief passage. Amy, can you read this passage for us, please?
I am a spy, a sleeper, a spoke, a man of two faces. Perhaps not surprisingly, I am also a man of two minds.
All right, excellent. So, pretty brief, very repetitive though. Let's see if we can analyze this. How does the narrator's description of himself establish central conflicts in in the novel? So, how does the narrator's description of himself establish central conflicts in the novel? I will give you guys the summary and I'll put it in the chat and try our best to answer this question. We don't have too much information to work with. Um, but yeah, if you have any questions for me, please let me know. All right, so looks like I got one answer so far. Let's check this out. All right, Eric, can you read your answer, please?
In The Sympathizer, the narrator's description of himself establishes central conflicts in the story by showing two contracting parts of his mind. In one part, he served the communists and was raised with the intention of becoming a spy. On the other hand, he also fled to the United States after the war, sympathizing with capitalist ideology. These two sides of the narrator's brain constantly contradict each other, leading to conflicts in the story.
All right, nice. So we're talking about our characters' conflicts, and we're mainly focusing on the internal conflict, which is absolutely what I was looking for here. So in The Sympathizer, the narrator's description of himself establishes central conflicts in the story by showing two contracting, if we meant to say contrasting, showing two contrasting parts of his mind. In one part, he serves the communists, and I don't think we need this comma here. He served the communists and was raised with the intention of becoming a spy. On the other hand, he also fled to the United States after the war, sympathizing with the capitalist ideology. These two sides of the narrator's brain constantly contradict each other, leading to conflicts in the story. So, everything you said makes sense. It's good. It's a very solid introduction to this topic. Now, I only say introduction because we kind of we only discussed the top surface level of the idea. We didn't describe anything in detail. So you talked about how he is serving the communists, and on the other hand, he fled the US after the war. That's, a good introduction to it. You're off to a good start, but let's add a little bit of detail. Um, Maybe the summary was lacking some information, but there's definitely some quotes that we can use here to describe the duality of our character and his internal conflict. We can add a little bit of detail to be specific and then expand on that detail using our own words. So, just as a note, um, how do I phrase this? Use detail and your own explanations to further explain your points. It's a good answer for sure, though. Nothing wrong with the answer you provided. It's definitely a strong answer. Let's see, we got one more answer here. All right, Amy, can you read your answer?
Narrator's description of himself establishes central conflicts in the novel. After the fall of Saigon, he flees to the United States with a South Vietnamese general. As the spy becomes entangled in both American and Vietnam societies, uh, divide it it his loyalty and his beliefs are divided. This leads to the main conflict in the book.
All right, very nice. And let's make that change that you described here. His loyalty and his beliefs are divided. Um, okay, let's read this. So the narrator's, excuse me, the narrator's description of himself establishes. So because this is description, singular, as a result, we're going to need the appropriate conjugation of the word establish. If this was plural, then you can leave it as establish. But in this case, establishes would be more appropriate. The narrator's description of himself establishes, let's cross this out, central conflicts in the novel. After the fall of Saigon, he flees to the United States with the South Vietnamese general. As the spy becomes entangled in both American and Vietnam societies, his loyalty and his beliefs are divided. And we can cross this out too. This leads to the main conflict in the book. Okay, so again, we can definitely add some more detail here. We're off to a good start to clearly state what happened and what was the driving force between, or not between, but behind our characters' internal conflict. But let's explain a little bit more about what that conflict is. So what is he conflicted about? What are the two ideas that he's struggling with? How is it portrayed? Why is it even a struggle for him? There's a lot that we can bring up here. So basically roughly the same note that needs to be said here. Another key thing that we're missing is let's use quotes from the passage to explain your answer. So we're talking about internal conflicts, right? Um, so right off the bat, we can see a lot of repetition here. We're talking about a man of two faces, two minds. So we're getting the idea that he has two parts to himself. He described himself as a spy, a sleeper, a spook. So we're seeing that he's describing himself in a lot of different ways. This would have been a perfect opportunity to use this quote and point out like, okay, he feels this way about himself. He feels another way about himself. He's conflicted. He has two perspectives, at least, two faces that he's putting on for two different groups of people. Um, we can definitely expand on that next time. So try your best to really focus on the quote, pull details from the quote to back up your answer. Um, we got some more time. Let's do the second question. In what ways does the narrator represent broader political and cultural tensions? So in this question, we're strictly talking about what are the conflicts outside of our character? What are the political conflicts? What are the cultural conflicts that are going on? So try our best to answer this question. We don't have too much information to work with. Um, but yeah, try to submit your answer within 7 to 10 minutes and we'll take it up. All right, so we got an answer submitted. Let's check this out. Okay, Eric, can you read your answer, please?
Using the quote provided, the reader can easily tell how the narrator represents broader political and cultural tensions. The narrator mentions how he is a spy, a sleeper, a spook, a, a man of two faces. This shows how his communist heritage conflicts with his capitalist life. It also represents how in life people are afraid to be judged on their ideologies and beliefs because the narrator was too afraid to let the old part of his life go.
All right, excellent job. And I like how you started off by clearly using a quote or a portion of the quote, which is great. You know, you're taking the feedback that was provided. So using the quote provided, the reader can easily tell how the narrator represents broader political and cultural tensions. The narrator mentions how he is a spy, a sleeper, a spook, a man of two faces. This shows, um, right here, we can probably split this up into two sentences or combine them in a more seamless way. The narrator mentions how he is this, this, and this, which shows maybe it's probably a more appropriate way to tie these together, which shows how his communist heritage conflicts with his capitalist life. It also represents how in life people are afraid to be judged on their ideologies and beliefs because the narrator is too afraid. Um, which instead of saying because this doesn't actually explain your point that you're making. It's providing an example of the point you're making. So people are afraid to be judged on their ideologies and beliefs. Um, we can say evidence in how the narrator, let's make this red. So let's put a comma right here. Evidence in how the narrator is too afraid to let the old part of his life go. All right, much stronger answer here. This is a very well put answer. You did a combination of using the quote, using information from the summary, explaining it with your own words. Very well done. This is excellent. The main thing that I wanted to describe here, or that I wanted to see here actually, is just that we can identify that there's a difference in the political, cultural um, ideas here. So we have East versus West, communist versus capitalist, um, colonizer versus colonized. That's another thing that we can address. Yeah, as long as we can identify that, then we're golden. We're good. So let's move on. We have one more answer. Amy, can you read your answer, please?
The narrative represents broader political and cultural tensions by embodying the divide of the Vietnam War. The narrative's role as a spy mirrors the larger conflict between South and North Vietnam. Its cultural identity as a half French and half Vietnamese man also represents the colonial and post-colonial tensions. He is also a Vietnam refugee in America, and he needs to think about both his South Vietnam friends and his commander, showing how all the refugees cannot really be part of the society.
Right. Very well done. So we're taking a slightly different approach with our answer. We are looking at the day-to-day life of our character here. How can they, assimilate seamlessly since they're kind of on the fence? They're part of two groups. So good stuff here. This is very well written. So the narrator represents broader political and cultural tensions by embodying the divide of the Vietnam War. The narrator's role as a spy mirrors the larger conflict between South and North Vietnam. I think in this case, because these are titled as areas of Vietnam, we're gonna actually need to capitalize it. And I might as well cross this out too. All right. His cultural this is an adjective. Cultural identity as a half French and half Vietnamese. Spelt a little bit incorrect. Vietnamese. Yep. Also represents the colonial and post-colonial tensions. Good points. He is also a Vietnam refugee in America, and he needs to think about both his South Vietnam friends. So same thing, just capitalize this. Needs to think about both his South Vietnam friends and his commander, showing how all the refugees cannot really be part of the society. Very well said. Um, yeah, we provided a lot of detail here to describe the differences, as well as kind of like a first-hand experience of what our character is going through. So that's a strong way to decide, or sorry, to describe the differences here. Let's keep it moving. We got both questions done pretty well, pretty quickly. Let's look at our lesson plan as we've been doing for quite some time now. We're exploring deeper, more philosophical themes. Very important for, higher level education and reading analysis, or literary analysis, I should say. And the most recent theme we're looking at is memory, trauma, and the past. Just to refresh, I want to reread a little blurb from each. So, Eric, can you read this page for us, please?
When we talk about memory in literature, we're not just referring to remembering events exactly as they happened. Memory is often selective and shaped by emotion, meaning characters remember things based on how the moments felt rather than what objectively occurred. Authors use memory to show us how characters interpret their own lives, and sometimes those memories are unreliable or incomplete. This means that memory becomes a tool for understanding identity. Who a character believes they are is often is built on what they remember, what they choose to forget, and how those memories have changed over time.
All right. Excellent job. So this idea, the whole aspect of memory, it really helps shape our character and, kind of gives us, the readers, better perspective on who the character is, what they choose to remember, what they choose to forget, how do their memories affect their behavior and the things that they do going forward, their emotions. That all plays a strong factor in analyzing whatever you're reading. Next topic, trauma. Amy, can you read this page?
Trauma, trauma in literature refers to deeply distressing or overwhelming experiences that affect how a character thinks, feels, and remembers. Unlike ordinary memories, traumatic experiences are often not remembered in a clear or orderly way. Instead, they may appear fragmented, repeated, or even avoided entirely. Authors often show trauma through broken narration, silence, or intense emotional reactions rather than direct explanation. This is because trauma can be difficult to fully express in words. As readers, we often have to piece together what happened by paying attention to patterns, gaps, and emotional cues in the text.
All right, so nicely done. When we're talking about trauma, this has a lot to do with the emotional side of things. So we're looking at things that are stressful, things that are overwhelming, painful, and how does that affect our character? Also, how does that affect how the character remembers things? 'Cause like it says here, their memories could appear as fragmented, repeated, or even avoided entirely. So trauma can greatly affect how our character thinks, feels, remembers things, reacts to things. So this is another key part in understanding how our character behaves. And the last part, the past. Eric, can you read this part?
The past in literature is not just something that has already happened. It is something that continues to shape the present. Characters are constantly influenced by their past experiences, whether through memory, regret, guilt, or unresolved conflict. Authors often reveal the past gradually through flashbacks, nonlinear storytelling, or symbolism, showing how earlier events impact current decisions and relationships. In many texts, the past is not easily left behind. Instead, it resurfaces and influences identity, suggesting that who we are in the present is deeply connected to what we have experienced before.
All right, nice. So the past, this is kind of used as like a literary technique. So it's how the author can help reveal certain storytelling aspects. They can use flashbacks, they can use non-linear storytelling, which is what we did in our very first activity. They can use things like symbolism, a lot of ways for the characters to have certain moments resurfaced, further change who they are, to add to the conflict, maybe to add to how characters interact with each other. Um, yeah, overall, it's a strong way to push the story forward. So, that being said, let's check out this passage here. We already answered the first question, but let's do the next two questions as well. Amy, can you read this passage for us, please?
It didn't come back all at once. Just the sound at first, then the silence that followed. The red stayed somewhere out of reach, like it refused to be remembered.
Right, nice. So, based on this passage, let's answer the second question, which says, analyze the phrase refused to be remembered. What does this imply? What's the meaning of the phrase refused to be remembered? These answers don't have to be too long. I think like 3 sentences should be a solid answer. If you have any questions for me, please let me know. But try to get this submitted within like the next 5 to 7 minutes or so.
Wait, this is number one, right?
Um, well, I mean, number one, like question number one, we already answered, so we're doing question number two.
Okay, thanks.
All right, so we got one of our answers submitted. All right, Eric, can you read your answer, please?
Using the quote given, the phrase refuse to be remembered shows the character's trauma. In the quote, the narrator has a flashback to the past that was deeply traumatic to them. This is why when the phrase refuse to be remembered is there, it implies that the event that happened that day left deep emotional scarring onto the narrator, making it hard to remember.
All right, very strong answer here. So we have um, the overall topic that this is an example of trauma. You explained it perfectly. You're talking about how it is difficult or kind of somebody that just doesn't want to remember something. It has a deep emotional scar on the narrator. So that's absolutely correct. Let's give this a quick read through for proofreading. Using the quote given, the phrase refused to be remembered shows the character's trauma. In the quote, the narrator has a flashback to the past that was deeply traumatic to them. This is why when the phrase, let's put a comma here, refused to be remembered is there. Um, this is why when the phrase refused to be remembered is there, it implies this. I think we can rephrase this a little bit. This is why the phrase is, I guess we can say this is why when the narrator, can't type, mentions the phrase refuse to be remembered, this is why when the narrator mentions the phrase refuse to be remembered, it implies that the events that happened that day left deep emotional scarring onto the narrator. I think just on the narrator is fine, making it hard to remember. Nice. Hard to remember, or even difficult, like they don't want to remember it. And let's do the next answer. Amy, can you read your answer, please?
The phrase refuse to be remembered implies that the thing the narrator is remembering is not just memory, it's trauma. The memory isn't simply forgotten, it stays somewhere out of reach. Traumatic experiences are repressed by the mind to protect the self from overwhelming pain. The memory is probably held back by the narrator's subconscious.
All right. Excellent job. So we're doing a great job so far of identifying what trauma looks like and, how to identify it. So the phrase refuse to be remembered implies that implies that the thing the narrator is remembering is not just memory. Maybe we can say it's not just a memory, it's trauma. The memory isn't simply forgotten, it stays somewhere out of reach. Traumatic experiences are repressed by the mind to protect the self from overwhelming pain. The memory is probably held back by the narrator's subconscious. Very well done. Excellent points being made here. Um, let's see if we can tackle the next question. How does the passage blur the line between memory and emotion? Yeah, let's try that out. Last question. How does the passage blur the line between memory and emotion? So try to see if we can define the differences between how memory is shown in this passage and how emotion is shown in this passage. Again, around 3 sentences is a good length. If you have any questions for me, please let me know. All right, so let's check out our answer here. We're on a new page. All right. Eric, can you read your answer, please?
In the passage given above, it clearly blurs the line between memory and emotion. The author does this by conveying how the narrator's emotions influence the memory. For example, the quote mentions how the sound came first and the sound that followed. This quote shows deep emotional meaning and clearly shows the narrator's feelings toward the memory.
All right, nice. So we're addressing how the two topics are related to each other. You said how emotions influence the memory. Um, let's see, in the passage given above, clearly blurs the line between memory and emotion. The author does this by conveying how the narrator's emotions influence. For example, the quote mentions how the sound came at first, then the silence that followed. We're missing the end quote here, and I think it's probably here. And I'm gonna put a comma right there. Let me just make that red. All right. Quote mentions how the sound came at first, then the silence that followed. This quote shows deep emotional meaning and clearly shows that the narrator's feelings towards the memory. Okay, so we didn't really explain it. We didn't explain how does memory influence, or sorry, how does emotion influence memory in this specific quote that you used. We're just saying that it appears here, but we don't say how. We don't explain ourselves. We don't really back it up. So we're missing that bit of detail here. Um, we're also trying to figure out how does it blur the line. So we're trying to define both topics. What does memory mean in this passage? What does emotion mean in this passage? And how are they like they're very similar, but they're still different. That's what they mean by blurring the lines. Um, they're supposed to be different, but they're made to be like so similar that it's hard to tell. So yeah, we're a little bit off in our answer here. Um, but yeah, maybe it's just a little bit of a tricky wording. Not a bad answer nonetheless. Let's check out our other answer as well. All right, Amy, can you read your answer, please?
The passage blurs the line between memory and emotion. The sound and the silence are not just the detail of the event, they also carry overwhelming pain and terror. The phrase refuse to be remembered also shows trauma, making the memory indistinguishable from the emotion of that moment.
All right. Nice. So the passage blurs the line between memory and emotion. The sound and the sounds are not just a detail of the event, they also carry overwhelming pain and terror. The phrase refuse to be remembered also shows trauma, making the memory indistinguishable from the emotion of that moment. Okay, so we're adding a little bit more detail here. We're adding more explanation, which is good. Um, the sound and silence are not just a detail of the event, they also carry overwhelming pain and terror. This phrase right here, or this sentence, I mean, this is key. So this explains how this is not just what the character is remembering. They're not simply just remembering the sound and the silence, but those two characteristics are driven by emotion. There's emotion behind it. Like you said, there's pain behind it. There's terror behind it. So this is a pretty solid answer right here. Well done. Let's check out the next activity here. We're going to be looking at two passages and we'll answer a few questions based on both passages. Eric, can you read these two passages for us, please?
Passage A. I remember the day clearly. The sun was bright, the air warm, and everything unfolded just as I expected. Passage B. The day comes back in flashes. A door, a voice, then nothing. Just the feeling that something went wrong. Number one. Which passage feels more emotionally intense? Why? 2. How does trauma affect clarity and detail? 3. What might each passage suggest about the narrator's state of mind?
All right, nice. So thanks for reading the questions as well. So based on these two passages, let's answer just question one for now. I like that. So which passage feels more emotionally intense and why? So again, 3 sentences seems like a solid length for our answer. The key point here is explain why you chose passage A or B as more intense. If you have any questions for me, please let me know. All right. Let's look at our answer. Okay. Eric, can you read your answer, please?
I believe that passage B feels more emotionally intense. This is because passage B uses instances of emotion to build suspense. For example, when the quote mentions the day comes back in flashes, the reader can clearly understand that the narrator is in shock of what happened that day. Also, the repetition of using very small sentences is used to build suspense. These actions influence the emotional intensity of passage B.
All right. Excellent points being made here. I believe that passage B feels more emotionally intense. This is because passage B uses instances of emotion to build suspense. For example, when the quote mentions the day, let's try to put a comma before the quotes. The day comes back in flashes. The reader can clearly understand that the narrator is in shock of what happened that day. Also, the repetition of using very small sentences is used to build suspense. These actions influence the emotional intensity of passage B. All right, nicely done. I don't really have any comments here. This is a really thorough answer, and you provide multiple strong points. Let's look at our second answer. Amy, can you read your answer, please?
Passage B is far more emotionally intense than Passage A. Passage A seems to be calm and warm, just as I expected. In Passage B, there is a flash, a door, a voice, then nothing. The unpredictableness shows that Passage B is trauma. Trauma shatters memory's clarity, fracturing recall into isolated fragments and erasing full context.
All right, nicely done. And we're roughly on the same way, the same vibe here with the same similar points being made, so especially about the trauma and what's causing the trauma. Let's proofread this. So passage B is far more emotionally intense than passage A. Passage A seems to be calm and warm, just as I expected. Um, is this a direct quote? Yep. So let's just try to make this sound a little bit more natural and smooth. Seems to be calm and warm, um, indicated through the mention of the phrase, just as I expected. In passage B, there is a flash. Oh, wait, let me quickly make this red. Okay, in passage B, there's a flash, a door, a voice, then nothing. The unpredictableness shows that passage B is trauma. Maybe not stating that it is trauma, but we can say that it um, is, I guess we could say displaying characteristics of trauma. Trauma shatters memory's clarity. Um, this is going to be possessive, like this, memory's clarity. Or we can say the clarity of memories. Fracturing recall into isolated fragments and erasing full context. Nice. Very well said there. So yeah, you guys are both absolutely correct here. Passage B is more emotionally intense. You guys both talked about trauma, and emotion. Very nicely done. So we'll continue with this type of topic, with this theme going forward. But we'll pick on like some more challenging pieces of literature to analyze. But that's it for today's class, you guys. Great stuff today. I will see you both next week. Take care.
Bye, thank you, see you next week.
Bye bye.